if your gut is telling you that something is wrong, do not talk yourself out of getting questions answered and having someone get eyes on that baby, because two things. One is you got to trust your instinct. Two is don't talk yourself out of calling yourself a first-time mom or inexperienced or I don't know what I'm doing and not be able to have the validation or reassurance that things are as they should.
Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection podcast. I'm your host, Heather Boyd, and we are staying on the theme of newborns today. Now, 2 episodes ago, episode 61, I talked about sleep from newborn to the first 3 months. But while I was literally in the middle of recording that, I kept thinking, gosh, I need to delve into the first few days or the first week a little bit more for the parents or expectant parents, those of you who are going to be welcoming a new, very new, from day one baby into your life very soon. Knowing what to expect of sleep in that first week can be game-changing because likely, like many, many parents, you've done a lot of prep around the birth, but haven't given much thought to feeding, sleeping, and anything else that comes after you've given birth. So if you are an expectant parent on the verge of having a very shiny new baby, then this episode is for you because we're going to keep it short and very simple for your exhausted and anxious mind. So let's start from the top because and this will be a little overlap from last week. I want this to be a standalone episode. But for those of you in particular who are on the verge of becoming parents, or parents again, but once you've been through it once, there's kind of a roadmap for you. These initial days as parents can be quite a haze. Everything is new, overwhelming. The attention that you're going to be paying to details, not to mention any recovery postpartum and any of the turbulent mental health issues that can come with that. Life is going to be a little wild for a while. And sleep is one of those things that if you haven't got anything that helps put things into perspective, it's one additional layer that can make things feel overwhelming. So the focus of today's episode is going to be on what newborn sleep looks like in the first week, how to support feeding and recovery and connection, all through the lens, of course, of biology and what makes sense. Now, just like in episode 61, I am going to lay out that I do not work with newborns. Families are recovering from labor and delivery and trying to get feeding lined up. I am not the first person families call when things are feeling uncertain. That comes later. So although I don't coach families at this stage, as a mom of 3, I've been through this stage 3 times, and I know that every client that I see, unless they are coming to a prenatal workshop and meeting me ahead of time, every client has already been through this first week and beyond. So let's break it down for those of you who may, in a few months or 6 months or a year, reach out to me. But right now, you just need a little bit of guidance on what this is going to look like. In the first week, as in the first few months, circadian rhythm is not online yet. Newborns don't have the hormones or the biology or the physiology to figure out day and night. That happens later. Also, their entire environment has completely changed from a constant low-level movement when they're in utero and warmth and muffled sounds and feed on demand. Like nothing is like after birth for them. They are going through a dramatic shift. We also know in terms of the actual sleep architecture, like how sleep works, their sleep cycles are short. They take a while to get longer. We know that. But if they're going to be the shortest, this is the period they're going to be the shortest, with a couple of caveats that are going to come up in the episode. Their active sleep dominates sleep. So that restless REM sleep, which means lots of twitching, lots of startling, not lots of sounds that they're making. And I would say for newborn parents or parents of newborns, those twitches and noises and startles
are often not expected. And so you see it and think, oh my goodness, like they're not sleeping. They're not, yes, they are. It's active sleep. It is what a newborn should be doing, but it's weird and noisy. I'll say one caveat as well. I'm going to throw in a few caveats today. There is an episode where I got to interview Dr. Warsh or Dr. Gator, a pediatrician, a former Canadian, Torontonian, down in California now. And I don't know whether it was that interview or whether it was his book that I read in preparation for the interview. But he said, as a pediatrician, one of his main jobs, like I think it was his primary job, was saying, yes, that's normal. And so there's going to be a lot of things about newborn sleep in the first week and beyond, or parenting in general, where it's, yes, that's normal. However, if your gut is telling you that something is wrong, do not talk yourself out of getting questions answered and having someone get eyes on that baby, because two things. One is you got to trust your instinct. Two is don't talk yourself out of calling yourself a first-time mom or inexperienced or I don't know what I'm doing, and not be able to have the validation or reassurance that things are as they should. Okay, so why does sleep look so messy in the first week? I'll say week overall, but we're going to focus in on the first 1 or 2 days in a few minutes. Feeding drives sleep at this stage and not the other way around. So what do I mean by that? Well, newborns wake because they're hungry, not because they're bad sleepers. Their stomachs, I think, are like tiny. They only can hold like 5 to 7 mils on day one. I think it's Karla Masse, who I also interviewed in a previous workshop, that talks a lot about just how small a baby's stomach is and how little they can hold. So they need frequent refills to do all the immense growing that they are doing. And of course, with what goes in, it's going to come out, spit up poop, lots and lots of poop. That's going to interrupt sleep to a degree too, although sometimes newborns sleep through quite a lot of that. I will add that a full belly, when babies are getting a good feed, it makes sleep possible. So after a good feed, babies are often falling into their deeper end of sleep or more organized sleep. And therefore, that link between feeding and sleep is especially strong for newborns. Because breast milk, and this applies to formula too, just based on the size of newborn's belly, but breast milk is very quickly metabolized, very high in sugar. It goes through the system fast. That means they're hungry again really, really soon. And that's the way nature planned it, because for how immature human babies are, they are the most immature primates on the planet. They need parents to be close by to make sure all their needs are met for temperature regulation, nervous system regulation, feeding, the whole bit. And therefore, that kind of all works out that if they're feeding frequently and therefore waking frequently to make sure those feeds are close, they're actually building in protection for themselves by keeping caregivers close. Now, sleep length at this stage, and to a certain degree beyond this, is pretty tied to how effective feeding is. Now, I have had, I believe, three IBCLCs on the podcast. Hey, I feel like this is turning into a recap of 2025. I'm bringing up a lot of previous episodes here. I'm going to be kept quite busy putting a list of mentioned in this podcast into the show notes for you. So if I mention something, look for it in the show notes so you can listen to that episode. But sleep length is tied to feeding effectiveness. So even though I'm not an IBCLC, I know that how effective a latch is and how much milk gets transferred is going to support longer stretches. Now, longer is like in italices and quotation marks, because longer is not going to be the kind of length that you expect from a 4-month-old even, or a 6-month-old. When feeds are inefficient or intake is low or milk takes a bit longer to come in, there's going to be more waking, more sucking to try to get that milk in, and a lot of unsettled behavior till that milk comes in. The more babies wake, the more they are going to be sucking, and the faster and more supply that a breastfeeding parent is going to have. That won't play out, of course, as much with formula feeding, but you might be finding that you are preparing it all the time. Now, feeding patterns as well. I know I said feeding drives sleep, but feeding patterns also regulate the nervous system. That suck, swallow, breathe sequence has a very regulating effect on the brain, which can help prepare a young brain for sleep. Now we can also, of course, talk about the growth spurts that are going to be driving feeding, because I know if any of you have gone through this already, this cluster feeding, where you finally get into a bit of a groove with feeding, and then all of a sudden it feels like your baby is like round the clock feeding, and it makes no sense to you because there's no pattern other than 100% feeding 100% of the time. It's going to interrupt sleep because they need to rouse out of sleep to signal. You're latching them on or preparing a bottle. And this is really about baby prioritizing feeding for growth. Growth is what drives feeding. We're doing a lot of driving in this episode, aren't we? Growth drives feeding, not the other way around. So babies feed because they're growing. They don't grow because they feed. So that driver comes from the growth piece. That's when those cluster feeds go up. And that's when you know growth is coming. It's driving the feeding. So the key idea I want to just highlight here before we go on to what night 1 and 2 look like is you can't separate sleep from feeding. They are like bound together. In fact, it's James McKenna who talks about breast sleeping because he combines nursing with sleeping as almost being one special union together that can't really be separated. So what does it actually look like then? Well, I'm going to break down what it looks like in night 1 and what it looks like in night 2. These are not hard and fast rules, but fairly consistent. And it's worthwhile breaking this down so that if you are expecting, you won't be surprised about what's happening. Again, knowing that if you think something is not going well, reach out to your midwife or doctor or whoever's on your team, wherever you are, whether you're in hospital or had a home birth. Make sure you're reaching out for the reassurance. I'm going to make sure I pull in a story of that very case with my firstborn when I just felt like, even though I'd given birth vaginally, it felt like he had literally dropped from the sky. Like, who is this little one who's in the house? I don't even get what's going on. Like, how are they leaving us with this person? Why are they leaving us in charge? We're not competent. We don't have like a card or certification that says that we're able to manage this. This is crazy. So let's talk a little bit about night 1 and night 2. So night 1 is usually sleepy recovery night. So most babies are coming down from probably the largest adventure they've been on to date. Traveling down the birth canal or coming out into the world through C-section, there is huge sensory overload. It is a very, very sensory heavy experience. And after that, they need to rest. They tend to be extra drowsy. They fall asleep mid-feed. They drift in and out of light dozing. And you might find that you've been asked to wake them up for feed so that they're feeding regularly, even though they're in a very deep sleep because of what they've just been through. That can work very well for parents who have also been through one of the most wild adventures they've ever been on, right? So it's helpful to know that this is what it looks like so that you may be able to catch a little bit of rest and recovery more than you would if you weren't expecting this. In the meantime, your little baby, they're conserving their energy, stabilizing their temperature, stabilizing their breathing, and just recovering like you are from the marathon of getting here. That's night 1. Night 2 is a whole different story. It's like all of a sudden their nervous system really switches on. Babies tend to be much more alert, more vocal, more interested in feeding. You'll have had several opportunities to work on feeding and latch, whether it's by bottle or by breast. They're feeding a lot, very frequently. And often there's a lot more crying on night 2. A lot more holding required. They might be popping off the bottle or breast only to start rooting again right away. Those reflexes are starting to come in, and it can be a real surprise. It was for me. And you think, what happened? Everything was so good. I still remember with my second-born, you feel a little more confident with your second-born. And that first night, still had that endorphin rush, I think, that high. I had lots of energy. I didn't feel sleepy. It was a pretty straightforward delivery at home. So I was pretty low key and low stress. And latching initially went pretty well. So the feeding end of things was taken care of. And I thought, this is so easy. Like, I'm not even tired. And so I was just working on adrenaline. And the second night, it's like, oh my goodness, what has happened? You might think, like I did, that something is wrong, or like, wait a second, can I have baby one back, like from night one? But this is exactly what biology intends. So all that frequent feeding is telling your body, hey, let's bring this milk in because there's obviously a demand. So we got to meet the supply. And all that closeness helps regulate their nervous system after that really rough welcome to the world. So if night one feels strangely peaceful and night two feels like a plot twist, nothing is wrong. This is a normal rhythm of newborn transition from in utero to out in the world. Night one is recovery. Night two is recalibrate and take in the senses. And both are temporary. As much as I was enjoying and savoring night one with my second born, because it's like, this is just, he's sleeping longer and he's not crying and it's all great. It was with my firstborn that on night one, and he was born at 6:30 in the morning. So we had all day to adjust to him and to work on my latch and getting the feeds sorted out. And then by nighttime, he was in full recovery mode and was really sound asleep, difficult to rouse. And I ended up calling the midwife like in the wee hours of the morning. I was in my house coat, of course. We were living in a condo that required me to go outside to open the gate for her. Oh my goodness. And it was November. I still remember walking down the steps to bring in the midwife. And he was fine. He was just recovering. Now, again, you got to trust your instincts on this. I felt silly. I felt like a first-time mom. I felt like I might be making a big deal out of nothing, but I also needed the reassurance that he was okay. And the midwife actually supported us in taking his temperature. It was on the low side, so we were working on warming him up, making the room warmer, lots more skin on skin. Well, we were doing lots of skin on skin. I think every birth and every parent's experience is going to be a little different. And even when you have a second or third, your experience around trying to manage whether this is okay or not is going to shift. And especially for a first-time parent, you're going to have a lot of questions and uncertainties, and that's okay. Get the answers you need to feel reassured. Okay, so let's broaden the lens here. We're past day 2. We're going to look at the first week overall. Total sleep tends to be 14 to 17 hours, although sometimes much, much more than that. Stretches are short. And I think I said earlier, nights and days might be completely reversed. Cluster feeding may be a theme for you in the first week, especially in the evenings. And there's going to be lots and lots of grunting and noisy breathing. Let's remember that they're figuring out every physiological system in their body right now, from temperature regulation to heart rate to breathing to making sounds, vocalizing, and pooping. And those noisy sounds they make, trying to figure out how to get their bowels to contract to get poop out. It's really complicated to figure out something like that if you're new to the world, and it's not like that part comes with the manual, as with anything with parenting. I'll say as well that babies are going to vary a lot. And a lot of the parents that I work with, even at 6 months or a year or 2 years, will think back to their baby as a newborn and say they see now that there were some trends in sleep personality. So some babies will sleep longer, some will only sleep with contact. And that's part of understanding who your baby is and what they need. So you can give them what they need as best as you can, because that is what they're built to need and expect from their environment. I wanted to point out some normal patterns that you might see that parents often worry about. One is that baby will only sleep on somebody, so those contact naps. You may have heard of the 4th trimester concept, the idea that the first 3 months of life are an extension of in utero, and trying to mimic some of the conditions that baby would have had when they were in utero can be helpful for just easing them into the world. I read a very interesting paper when I was getting ready to do my Foundations of Infant Sleep workshop for professionals that ran last month. And that has an ask and answer, by the way, in January. So if you're a professional listening to this and you want to level up your understanding of infant sleep development, then definitely look for that. There's another note that I need to put in the show notes under mentioned in this podcast. So the 4th trimester, there is a proposed theory that those first 3 months are part of finishing what is a 12-month cycle. that allows any of the rhythms that last through the seasons and through linked with circadian rhythm and linked with sleep-wake cycles and sleep pressure and anything tied to rhythm. That first 3 months of life are what bring an end to that whole first year if you go from conception to the end of that 3-month mark. And I thought that was really a fascinating theory. The author of that proposal suggested that's why we often see colic end at the 3-month mark, and that really what's driving some colic. I don't think it explains all colic, but some colic would be that there's a mismatch between that pressure to fall asleep and the circadian rhythm. And that I recognize even in older children that when we're not lining up bedtimes, for example, to line up with circadian rhythm and when it's naturally and hormonally drawing babies into sleep, coupled with sleep pressure that is building and that needs sleep to release, that we sometimes get a bit of an argument between the two. When the two are kind of nicely synced in, things go a little bit easier. So back to newborn sleep, what are the first week priorities? Well, they're feeding, safety, and regulation. Feeding, we've covered, it's linked to neurological recovery from that whole birth process. It's for growth. You're getting a sense of hunger cues, how often your baby needs to feed, and the signs that they are giving you when they need more food. The second is safety, safe sleep basics, back to sleep, no soft items where they're sleeping, and to know that contact sleep and lots of skin to skin can be a valuable way of bridging some of the sleep while still staying safe. Whether that means exploring safe bed sharing or not, it's about making sure that the environment your baby is in is as safe as possible for them. And the last was regulation. Babies co-regulate with you. And as newborns, they are really turning to you as their guide to this big world they've just been introduced to keep body temperature. They're now hearing your voice differently. They're getting your scent. And all of these things are going to play out really well in helping them organize their nervous system. Being held, of course, in those contact naps, that's a regulatory strategy and it's not a bad sleep habit. So what are the strategies to actually help in the first week? Well, strategy 1 is know what the first week looks like. So you can tick that one right off right now. The second is to try to promote day-night cues. Now, it's going to take a number of weeks for them to develop circadian rhythm. But when they can get light during the day and dim in the evenings, you are just supporting the development of circadian rhythm. We know circadian rhythm develops faster in babies closer to the equator because the sun, as a trigger for supporting the development of circadian rhythm, there's much more sun exposure. But the babies are not just getting exposure through light as a cue. There are different routines, voices, volume of voices, movements, gentle cues that you naturally do without even thinking about it as you get ready for bed. These will all play into supporting that there's daytime play where you're much more engaged and playful and they can see and they can be aware, and then at nighttime it's much more subdued, much quieter. Another strategy is to look at giving that nice deep pressure to babies to feel secure and contained, swaddling if it's appropriate, holding them against like chest to chest, skin on skin, and then considering that when babies love that containment, they've had not a lot of space in utero. If you are transferring them to a bassinet or a crib, bring them down slowly and keep your hands on them. Sometimes it's the top of the head. Sometimes it's on the chest. It just provides a little bit of gentle pressure that helps with that transition. I do want to explore, as we tie up this episode, some of the red flags that if your instincts are saying to get support and that something might be wrong, follow them, but some other things to look for on top of that. If your baby is too sleepy to feed and they're hard to wake for feeds, and not just once, but chronically through the day, or they're having fewer than expected wet, dirty diapers, it's worth reaching out to whichever healthcare provider is your number one contact in this first period of time. I almost think everyone should see an IBCLC after their baby is born. It can be exceptionally reassuring and can head off problems before they become big problems.
But if you're hearing a weak cry or not getting a good latch, or a baby is looking jaundiced, I would say, especially for babies that are not in hospital for routine monitoring, keep an eye on that. I had midwifery care and home birth, so what it looked like for me may be quite different than for you coming home without midwifery care, because they continue to come to the house, which is a beautiful thing in terms of support and reassurance and not having to go out. If you're noticing your baby is very tight or has very low tone, now we know babies don't have really high tone. They tend to have poor neck control. Reach out if there's something that's not feeling right. Now, and I realize for new parents, nothing feels right. Everything feels new. Nothing feels reassuring because you're not really sure what to expect. But keep that key point person in mind and make sure that there's a good line of communication for getting support. And of course, trust your intuition if something is not feeling right. So to sum up, then, in terms of this first week of sleeping, week 1 is about recovery, about sorting out feeding, about bonding and lots of skin on skin, and about learning about each other. You are each new to this relationship, and they are also new to the world, but it's going to feel like your world is completely new too. There's life now, and then there's life before baby was born. This first week of sleep is not predictive of future sleep patterns, although we can sometimes see personality in hindsight starting to come through. But don't think that if the first week is rough, that this means that sleep will always be rough. Understand as well that you're not creating bad habits, you're creating safety. I want to go back to that last point about sleep in the first week not being predictive, because although parents looking back will say they've never slept well, that's not about the first week in isolation. That's a pattern that tells us much more about temperament and sleep need than anything else. And so know that a vast majority of parents are going to report that sleep is pretty wild ride that first week. Let's not even dismiss how tired you are, how sore you may be from delivery or from recovering from major abdominal surgery and a C-section. If you have older children, then you're coupling all the layers of that as well. So know that this first week is new on so many levels that we can't put a pin on what this means in terms of sleep down the road. So in closing, how do I want to really pull in these points? If you're going to just fast forward and end here, what are the key points I want you to take? Or if you've been listening, but you can't retain much information because you're already tired and uncomfortable and very, very pregnant, or you already have a newborn in your arms and you're not firing on all cylinders today. Normal infant sleep in the newborn phase is very fragmented. Babies sleep like newborns because they are new to the world and their nervous system is new to processing any of this. If you can use ways that can help regulate them through skin on skin, through feeding, and through contact, if you can help pull in that circadian rhythm with a bit of light or just being aware that the routines that you already have in place are supporting that, then you are on a great path. You're doing more right than you realize. Most of the things in this week that parents are concerned about are normal, but trust those instincts when you need to. And I want to gently encourage you to do 3 things. One is rest, and that doesn't have to mean sleep. Delegate where you can, accept help. So get rest, delegate or accept help where you can. Start asking for help because you deserve it, because you were never meant to do this alone. And that discomfort around what is happening in your body when you ask for help is going to get rewired to something different, something amazing. And then the third thing would be to stop measuring success by how long your baby is sleeping. So I will send you off on this wild adventure if you're in this first week. I would love to hear in the comments whether anything stood out for you. If you're listening to this and you have an older baby and you're past the newborn phase, I'd love to know what stood out for you as being I remember that well. And if you were in the very first week of parenthood with this particular baby that is perhaps in your arms or sleeping restlessly beside you, I would love to hear what stood out for you. Until next time, I am wishing you restorative sleep, long, uninterrupted periods of sleep if your baby is at that stage, and certainly
rest and support. You deserve it. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.